Bertram had always been told the forest was dangerous. Not dangerous in the way a wild dog or an untrustworthy neighbor was dangerous. The kind of danger you could see, fight, or run from. No. The forest's danger was quieter, older, the sort that waited for you to forget yourself. The elders of Kestrel Hollow spoke of it in low voices over mugs of bitter ale, as though a careless word might drift on the wind and wake something listening. They said the trees whispered in a tongue no man could understand, that the paths changed when they pleased, and that there were eyes, unseen, but always watching. The forest, they said, did not like to give back what it had taken. Bertram had laughed at those stories as a boy, but that was before he learned that the elders never truly laughed when they told them. On that summer afternoon, he set out with nothing more than a small satchel, a skin of water, and a hunting knife at his belt. The task was simple: follow the river east until he found the wild marigold that grew along its banks, gather enough for the healer, and return before the sun touched the western ridge. He never intended to cross the river's bend, but the bend called to him. The current was high from the recent rains, tumbling over rocks in white froth. Sunlight caught the spray, scattering gold into the air. Bertram told himself he would go just a little farther, just to see the next turn, and then another, and another. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became. Birds fell silent, the wind-song faded, only the steady thrum of the river remained, pulling him onward. When at last he stopped, the sky was dimming, and he realized he did not know the way back. Trunks crowding together like silent sentinels. A twig snapped behind him. Bertram spun. But it was too late. A massive hand, rough and cold as quarried stone, clamped around his chest and lifted him from the ground. His breath was crushed out in a startled gasp. The creature holding him was taller than two men, with skin the grey-green of river rock, and a face like a weathered cliff. Its eyes were dark, glistening pools, set deep beneath a ridge of bone. Lost little rabbit, the troll rumbled. Its voice was a landslide, slow and heavy. Bertram kicked and twisted, but the troll's grip was iron. It sniffed him once, long and slow, then gave a sound like the grinding of boulders. A human. Been many seasons since we caught one of those. Bertram's mouth went dry. Let me go. I didn't mean. The troll did not answer. With a grunt, it swung him up over its shoulder. The motion drove the air from his lungs. His bow, the knife, the satchel, all were gone. The world became a nauseating rhythm of jolts and swaying branches as the troll carried him deeper into the forest. He turned to retrace his steps, forcing calm into his breathing. But the trees seemed closer now. They're mossy. They reached the mouth of a cavern framed by roots, as thick as ship masts. The troll ducked inside, and the air grew cooler, scented with damp earth and something metallic. The space within was vast, lit by the soft amber glow of crystal lanterns hanging from the ceiling. The walls were carved with spirals and runes, older than human memory. 12 trolls sat in a half-circle, their massive bodies draped in cloaks of moss and hides. They murmured in their deep, grinding tongue, as Bertram was dropped to his knees on the stone floor, but it was the figure behind them that stole his breath. On a dais of living root and silver, sat a woman unlike any he had ever seen. Her hair was pale as moonlit frost, her skin the warm gold of honey at dawn. Her eyes were green so deep, they seemed to hold the memory of the first forest. She wore a crown of silver leaves and emeralds that glimmered like trapped sunlight. The elven queen Nythera. She regarded him for a long moment. A human in the enchanted forest, she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried with the clarity of a stream over stone. This is forbidden. Bertram swallowed. I didn't mean to trespass. I was lost. Lost or not, she replied. Your kind must never know of us. For that reason, you may never leave. The words struck like a blow. Never leave. Never see home again. And then, over the queen's shoulder, Bertram saw her. She stood a step behind the throne, her bearing straight, her hands folded at her waist. Her hair was the deep burnished copper of autumn leaves, catching the lantern light. Her eyes were amber flecked with gold, watchful, curious. Unlike the queen, she did not look at him with cold judgment. There was no fear in her gaze, nor the scorn the trolls wore openly, only quiet interest. Later, he would learn her name is Lyra. When the queen's decree was spoken, Leora moved forward at a slight nod from her sovereign. She offered no words, only beckoned for Bertram to follow. He hesitated, but the trolls were still watching. The days that followed Bertram's arrival in the glade blurred into one another, like water over smooth stones. At dawn, pale gold light filtered through the willow's boughs, and he woke to the sound of the forest breathing, leaves whispering, water trickling through hidden channels. At night, the air shimmered faintly, with drifting motes of light that clung to his skin before dissolving. Leora was always there. Sometimes she appeared without sound, stepping from the shadows as if the trees had shaped her, and then released her back into the world. Other times, he would catch sight of her across the glade, speaking softly with another elf, or tending a bed of pale blossoms that only opened under moonlight. She brought him food, warm honey cakes, bread as soft as moss, fruit that bled gold when bitten. Her hands were deft and sure when she set them down, but her gaze would linger just a little too long, as if searching his face for something unspoken. In the first weeks, their words were practical, where he was permitted to walk, which plants would sicken him. The times the trolls patrolled the outer paths, but sometimes her tone would shift. One evening, as she handed him a clay cup of cool water, she asked, "Do humans always fear the dark?" "Not always," he said. "But we can't see in it the way you do. Darkness hides danger for us. For us, it hides safety." She looked toward the deeper forest, where the moonlight failed to reach. "It is the place we go to disappear." As the moon cycled, Bertram began to learn the boundaries of his new cage. There were paths he could walk freely. The glade's main circle, the silverleaf grove to the east, the low meadow where deer grazed without fear. Beyond those, Lyra's voice would sharpen. "Not that way." Once, he tested her limits, stepping toward a narrow track that curved into shadow. She caught his wrist before he'd taken 2 paces. "Bertram," she said quietly, "you do not understand the bargains that bind this place." "Then tell me." She released his wrist, but her voice was measured. "The forest itself watches. The queen is not its only ruler. If it believes you mean harm, it will not return you to anywhere." He thought of the way the trees sometimes seemed to lean closer when he passed. "You mean it's alive?" Her lips curved faintly. "Not alive as you are, but it remembers, and it has its own will." It was during the festival of the moon blossoms that Bertram saw Leora laugh for the first time. The elves gathered in the glade's heart, surrounding a tree whose trunk shimmered faintly silver under the starlight. At its base grew a bed of pale flowers that, as the moon rose, began to open. Their petals glowed softly, and the air filled with a scent like rain on warm stone. Elves danced in slow spirals, their movements weaving in and out, like threads on a loom. Harps and flutes played a tune that seemed older than the stones beneath their feet. Leora stood beside him, her copper hair catching the blossom's glow. A child darted past and pressed a crown of flowers into her hands. She was startled, and then, for a heartbeat, laughed. It was a sound unlike anything he'd heard, bright and warm, yet edged with something fragile, as though she hadn't let herself make it in a very long time. Bertram smiled before he could stop himself. "You should do that more often." She glanced at him, and for once, didn't look away quickly. Their closeness did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, while Leora was speaking to the glade's steward, Bertram felt the weight of another's gaze. Looking up, he saw the queen herself standing on the far rise, her silver crown catching the light. She did not speak, but her eyes moved from Leora to him, and held there. That night, Leora came to his dwelling later than usual. She set down a basket of bread and fruit, without meeting his gaze. She spoke to you, Bertram guessed. Yes, and Leora's voice was low. She warned me that the forest is not meant to bend for one man. Bertram's jaw tightened. I never asked her to bend anything. No, she said softly, finally looking at him. That's why it might. It was weeks later, in the shadow of the willow, that the space between them finally shifted. They sat by the starlit pool, their reflections swaying with the water. Leora was telling him of a river in the northern glens that sang in voices like a chorus when the thaw came. As she spoke, her hand rested lightly on the moss between them. Without thinking, Bertram set his beside it. Not touching, but close enough that the warmth of her skin reached him. She didn't move away. When she finished her story, there was a silence that felt heavier than the air around them. Her fingers shifted just slightly, brushing his. It was the smallest of contacts, but the world seemed to still for it. And though no vow was spoken, Bertram knew something had changed, that neither the Queen nor the forest could unmake. Since the night by the starlit pool, something unseen had shifted between them. It was in the way Leora would pause a heartbeat longer when she handed him bread. In the way Bertram found himself scanning the glade, until his eyes found her copper hair. It was in the silences, warm, unhurried, as though they were no longer strangers, but two people with a language that belonged only to them. But the forest noticed. It began subtly. The whispering in the leaves seemed to follow them when they walked together. The moss beneath their feet felt softer, the air warmer. Once, Bertram reached for a branch above a narrow stream, and it bent toward his hand, as if offering itself. "Does this happen often?" he asked one evening, as they crossed the silver-leaf grove. Leora's gaze swept the trees, a flicker of unease in her eyes. "No. The forest is listening. To us, yes. And if it decides you do not belong, it will find a way to tell the Queen." A week later, Bertram learned just how close the Queen's eyes could be. He was gathering herbs near the meadow's edge, when the ground shook with a slow, rhythmic thud. Turning, he saw a pair of trolls moving down the path, their massive feet sinking into the soil, their stone-grey faces impassive. They did not speak as they passed, but both heads turned toward him in unison. One lingered a moment too long before following the other into the trees. When he told Leora, she went very still. They should not have come so near the glade without cause. What cause would they have? Her voice was quiet. "You." The summons came the next morning. Two guards in silver-stitched cloaks led Bertram to the great hall, where the Queen sat upon her throne of root and silver. Sunlight streamed through high openings in the cavern walls, falling on her hair like molten frost. "You have been in my forest for many moons," she said, her voice even. "Have you learned its laws?" "Yes," Bertram said, though the words tasted like ash. "And yet, I hear whispers that the forest itself bends toward you, that it favors you." Bertram held her gaze. "I've done nothing to." She lifted a hand, silencing him. "It is not for you to question why the forest acts, but if it is true, then you are more dangerous than I believed. And those who stand too close to danger are drawn into it." The warning was not for him alone. That night, Leora came to him with urgency in her step. "I've found a way," she said, her eyes bright with something between hope and fear. "A path the trolls do not guard. It's old, forgotten by most, but it leads to the human lands." Bertram rose. "Then let's leave tonight." Her breath caught. "If I go, I will be cast out. The Queen will strip my name from our records. I will be nothing to my people." He stepped closer, the moonlight catching the line of her jaw, the copper shimmer in her hair. "Then be nothing to them. Be everything to me." Her lips parted, as if to protest, but no words came. They met under the willow, the pool reflecting a moon shrouded in drifting mist. The air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming flowers. Neither spoke of what they were leaving behind. Instead, Bertram brushed his fingers over hers, and she let him. Her other hand rose to his cheek, light as a falling leaf. For the first time, she leaned in, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The kiss was not hurried, It was the quiet sealing of a choice already made. When they parted, Leora whispered, "We run at dawn." The path twisted through the deepest part of the forest, where the trees were black silhouettes against a paling sky. Roots curled like sleeping serpents. Strange, watchful eyes glimmered from the undergrowth. Once, Bertram thought he heard the Queen's voice on the wind, low and cold. "You cannot hide from me." But Leora gripped his hand tighter, and they pressed on. When they reached the true edge, where the last oak's roots gave way to open meadow, she looked back only once, and then they stepped forward together, into the grass, into the dawn. The forest did not follow, but its whisper carried on the wind, not in anger, but in farewell. The first breath of open air tasted different. Not the damp, living sweetness of the glade, but the sharper, drier scent of wild grass under a rising sun. A breeze swept across the meadow, bending the tall stems, so they rippled like the surface of a lake. Bertram and Leora stood side by side, neither speaking for a long moment. The enchanted forest loomed behind them, its edge a wall of green shadow. Somewhere inside, the willow bent over its starlit pool. The silverleaf grove whispered. The trolls patrolled paths they would never walk again. She was the first to move, stepping into the meadow, until the grass brushed her hips. The sunlight caught in her hair, setting it aflame. "It smells strange," she murmured. "Lighter." "You'll get used to it," Bertram said, but his voice was soft, as though he wasn't entirely sure if he wanted her to. They walked until the trees were distant, and the sky wide above them. In the far haze, Bertram could see the dark ribbon of a road, and the faint shape of a village beyond. Leora slowed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "That's where your people are." "Yes." He hesitated. "I don't know how they'll react." "You are not like anything they've seen." Her amber eyes found his, and for a heartbeat, she looked uncertain. "Then I will stand beside you. And if they fear me, let them fear us together." That night, they stayed in an abandoned shepherd's hut, on the edge of the road. The air was cooler, the wind slipping through cracks in the walls. Bertram gathered kindling for a fire, but when he returned, Lyra was staring at the door. "It's following us," she whispered. He froze. "The trolls." She shook her head. "The forest." And he felt it then, faint but real, a shift in the air, as though a breath had passed through the room. In the corner, a single moon blossom had pushed through the floorboards, glowing faintly in the dark. Days turned to weeks. They found work in the village, Bertram as a hunter, Lyra in the healer's hut, her knowledge of herbs unmatched. People whispered about her strange beauty, her voice like wind in the leaves, the way plants seemed to bend toward her hands. Some feared her, some avoided her, but a few came to trust her, drawn by the quiet steadiness in her gaze. At night, in the small loft they now called theirs, Bertram would watch her in the moonlight, and think of the first time he saw her standing behind the Queen, all fire and restraint. Now she was his, and yet, a part of her still belonged to the forest. One evening, as summer waned, Bertram found her on the edge of the meadow, staring back toward the dark line of trees. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. "But I chose you." He stepped beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Then we'll make a new forest here." And when she turned to him, smiling faintly, the wind carried a whisper through the grass, a sound so soft, he almost didn't hear it. "We are still watching."